Hello guys, SuperBearNeo here, and today's video is going to be probably different from my usual type of videos, but this is a concept I'm going to explain that unfortunately in my opinion shouldn't apply to debating, but it's still interesting to talk about regardless. Basically what I'm going to talk about, in case you haven't gathered by the title, is the theory of forms, or basically the allegory of the cave, to explain the theory of forms basically. But in case you didn't know, there's this concept called the allegory of the cave, which seeks to explain basically the scale of Platonic concepts and how they work. And what this video seeks to do is basically give a rundown or an explanation of how exactly that works, and basically stuff like that. So with that being said, I'm gonna pretty much just start the video right off, and I'm gonna explain it basically. So in the allegory of the cave, basically what it explains is we have these three prisoners, right? These three prisoners who are chained up. Right behind them is a fire, and since there's a fire, there's also people who are walking through this cave. So basically we have a fire right behind three prisoners, and right behind the prisoners also, and like in between the flame and the prisoners, there's a holes, and with these holes, basically people, other figures and stuff, they walk through these holes, and basically they project themselves through the fire, basically creating shadows. Now basically these three prisoners, right, they basically see the shadows themselves. Now this is representative of our reality. Basically what these shadows they're basically our flawed perception of reality. But basically in the context of the allegory of the cave, this is reality for the prisoners, as this is what they've been learned to perceive. So basically they try to make concepts and make ideals from these shadows that are projected from the flame itself, which by the way came from basically the true archetypal ideal, which I'll get to that later because that's the last part. But basically, yeah, so basically these three prisoners are seeing shadows, and they try to make reality or try to make sense of these shadows that are being projected through the fire. So with that being said, one prisoner gets unlocked from their chains and they manage to break free. So basically now there's just two prisoners, but however the prisoner that got three, basically they are able to escape the falsehood of reality, which is representative of the shadows in the cave. They basically are able to exit the cave itself. And with this being said, they're able to perceive reality basically, or at least a more archetypal reality in the sense. So basically what happens is the prisoner, they basically learn that what they've been perceiving, aka the shadows, is just a flawed reflection of what actually concretely exists. And basically this is where we start to get into, the perfecthood of what we perceive basically. So basically the prisoner themselves, they basically get to experience reality and experience the object that we're projecting the shadows directly. So basically instead of just interacting with the participants of the concept, like for example you have the concept of water, but then you have the concrete water itself. So instead of actually interacting with just the participants of the concept itself, they basically get to interact with the very archetypal ideal itself basically. And mind you, this isn't the most fundamental reality itself, because at the end of the day there's something projecting even what that concept is. The most fundamental and archetypal perfect form of that concept is projecting that, and it's sort of like a hierarchy in that sense. But basically what this means is the prisoner goes back to basically tell the other prisoners of this higher reality and stuff. Well, not higher reality, but basically this more fundamental, more quote-unquote perfect reality. However, the two prisoners themselves, they basically react in a very violent manner, because human nature is basically wanting to stay in ignorance. And ignorance basically, like for example, we're used to perceiving the shadows, but if you were to usually show someone who's quote-unquote normal these shadows, well, more like baseline reality or something like that, basically they would be more accustomed to it. But if you were to take them outside the cave itself, aka outside the illusion of reality, basically what happens is they wouldn't want to do that, because they're more used to seeing the shadows themselves. So they don't want to basically be called out on their ignorance, as they want to be basically considered what they're used to. So with that being said, the two prisoners, out of human nature, basically rejects this higher knowledge and stuff like that, and they basically want to be more accustomed to their ignorance, aka the shadow of reality. So basically, this is relevant because this is what basically Platonic concept is. Basically, well, not really Platonic concept, but this is basically how everything goes. And basically, what we perceive, basically all the stuff that we perceive, that's basically the shadows themselves. And basically, what the and that's pretty much it. Like, what we basically the shadows themselves versus the illusion of reality. Basically, what our flawed interpretation of what the concepts are, and outside the cave is the concept itself, the concept, or basically the very essence of where that shadow comes from, basically. And beyond that, basically, is the perfect form, the perfect ideal archetypal thing, basically. The perfect form, as it is, the theory of forms, that's basically what it's called. So, like for example, you can have like a table, like a very fundamental table, but at the end of the day, it's still a participant of the concept of table, which in itself we perceive to basically be concrete. And basically, this table isn't the most perfect form of the table. The concept in itself is basically not perfect. There's a perfect, like I said, in Platonic, and like in the theory of forms, there's basically a perfect form of everything. Everything that we interact with is not the most perfect ideal idea of that concept. Like for example, a table, like I mentioned beforehand. A table, basically, the table itself is the most perfect form of a table. And the thing is, what the most perfect form is, no matter how we try to achieve it, we can't achieve a perfect form or a perfect anything, really. Idealistically, according to Plato, the perfect archetypal ideal isn't a reality far beyond what we could ever comprehend. So basically, perfection can't be achieved in our flawed physical reality, right? So beyond that, basically, is the plane where the most perfect ideal versions of what we basically interact with in our reality resides. And this is what we define, and this is what many people define as a Platonic concept, because like what Plato basically defines as a concept is far different from what we usually interact with or basically understand. Basically, a Platonic concept is just the most perfect and idealistic form of something that we interact with, basically. And with that being said, so basically what this means is everything that we interact, according to Plato that is, everything that we interact with is flawed. It's just our perception. And this also extends to very concepts that we perceive, like for example, beauty. Beauty itself, this is the most perfect form of beauty. Beauty itself is from our perception. Same for other things like justice, law, anything like that, basically. All these things that we perceive, basically, are just flawed manifestations of the most perfect idealistic versions of what we are basically understanding, basically. So, in a sense, basically, it's sort of like a hierarchy. But, yeah, with that being said, that's pretty much my take on the theory of forms and Platonic concepts. So, with that being said, that's all, folks. SuperBearNeo, peace the fuck out, like usual.